guys, we are not hating on these people.
No, we are not.
Don't take a soundbite.
Yes, don't you dare.
Don't you dare. Yeah, hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Please Bless This Podcast, where we talk about all things Mormon and pop culture. All things
we do.
Mormon. And do some deconstructing along the way. How about that?
What are we talking about today? Today we're talking about Mormon No More, a docuseries that just came out, actually. It was produced by ABC News. Came out on Hulu just like last week, June 2022. The timing, it's like they knew we were starting this podcast.
I was just gonna say we're staying on top of it.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm a little worried. I'm like, did something else come out this week? What's next?
What's next? So the through line for Mormon No More, this docuseries, is it follows the relationship of Sally and Lena, who are engaged to be married. They're a lesbian couple living in Southern California, and they both were Mormon, were married to men, had kids with those men, met each other, fell in love, left Mormonism, got together. Yeah. So their story is the center of this docuseries, but then also it pulls in other stories of LGBTQ Mormons. And there's a lot to talk about.
There sure is. I am going to apologize in advance. I have nothing but peace and love in my heart for Sally and Lena, but I am going to talk a little bit of shit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, but just a little bit. And it's like, honestly, nothing against them.
No. Let me say up front, I found this docuseries interesting, informative, engaging. I had tears in my eyes.
Oh, I wept
throughout.
Yeah.
I want everyone to be happy, to have love. Nothing but the best for everyone who participated. All the stories told.
Yes.
But we have some thoughts.
Just a couple, honestly. I mostly overwhelmingly just felt a little bit like, I'm not sure why exactly we're watching like a multi-part series about these people. Like specifically
this specific couple. Yeah.
Like why it was centered around them. And like, I get it that there's a wedding at the end and like, great. Spoiler alert. There's a wedding at the end, you know.
Yeah, there's like a clear narrative arc to it.
And it's very nice and we're very happy for them.
And they're, like beautiful people with adorable children. They make great TV.
Yes.
But I was like you. I was kind of like, oh, we're talking about them again. I thought we were off them and on to this next story, but we're back. And it was an interesting choice. And like you're making a docuseries, you got to choose what to focus on. This is who they chose to focus on. Yeah. Fine. It just, I don't even know what to say.
It did like kind of catch you a little bit where you'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
We're back. Okay. Sure. They're fighting about how expensive a wedding is in Southern California. Sure. You bet. I'm sure it is. I just don't know that was an essential plot point for me to engage with. I think what's happening in those moments is they're trying to show us like this couple, look at them, and they have such a fascinating story, but also they're real people and they're not just like everything's rosy and perfect. They still have conflicts. They still have disagreements. They're still grappling with who they are and what they value. Yes, sure. Good.
Yes.
Feel like, okay, we're already in too deep. We need to just talk about this central couple and then we'll move on, we promise.
Yes.
How do I put this? One of the things you battle when you're leaving the church is the stereotypes of ex-Mormons that practicing Mormons hold. And you are anxious about not being stereotyped.
Yeah.
So this sense that like, oh, people leave the church because they're offended or because they never understood it anyway, or
Mhm.
all these things that Mormons set up so that they can just like make you into straw man and dismiss you. Like your concerns aren't a big deal to me.
Yeah.
They're not valid because you are XYZ.
Mhm.
And I just kind of felt like this documentary really focused on a couple who practicing Mormons can easily dismiss.
Like in the first episode when they're introducing their story, and they're like pretty freshly, in the grand scheme of things, out of their previous marriages with their husbands, and their ex-husbands are featured in the show. And I think that a lot of Mormon people would see that and be like, wow, they're awful. Like they broke those guys' hearts and like tore their families apart.
Yeah, this is heartless.
Yeah.
Behavior.
And obviously, I think you should leave your husband if you're not sexually attracted to him.
Yeah. Yes. Also, if you dig into Lena and Sally, the central couple, at all, let me just read their bios from their website.
Yes, please do.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Lena, this is their own words, no hate. Lena is a moon cycle alchemist, in parentheses, period coach, holistic nutritionist, essential oil guru, energy healer, and a Kundalini yoga teacher.
Cool.
Right on. Right on. It's just, it's feeling like that stereotype that if you leave Mormonism, you're going to be searching far and wide for something to fill in, and you're gonna be grasping at everything you can think of to take the place of this faith you've left behind.
Yeah, and it's all almost like a rebellious, like all these things that are so, like either taboo or whatever. While you're in the church, you get out and
this is what a practicing Mormon is going to think when they see this, is like, oh, wow, she's grasping at anything to replace Mormonism. Look at how untethered this person is without Mormonism. Next, Sally is an adventure junkie, podcast host, and a coming out coach, helping people peacefully navigate coming out of religion or coming out of the closet. So we're dealing with another stereotype here, which is like the Mormon who leaves Mormonism and then can't leave it alone, people like to say, and like is like, let me guide you out. Let me, for some undisclosed amount of money, which we couldn't find anywhere on the website, coach you out of Mormonism. No hate.
No.
Make a living. God bless.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
When I watch something like this, what I want is for like my mom to be able to watch it and to find no like thread that she can hold on to and unravel.
Right. And to be fair, that is unfair.
Oh, yes. We are setting like completely unfair expectations for these people, this series. But I just wanted it to be airtight.
I know. And I think, what we're looking for is just a different show, period. I thought it was a great story. I'm happy for them.
Yes. So anyway, we're just quibbling because we care about these kinds of pop culture artifacts. We want them to really land.
Yeah, I think as ex-Mormons with parents who are in and loved ones who are in, you just live with that like desperate hope that something's going to come out that you're going to be able to like maybe hopefully pass along. And that's gonna,
is this the thing I could send them and they could watch it and really interrogate their beliefs? And there are moments in here where I think yes, and I just wanted the whole thing to really get there.
Yeah. So unfair to Sally and Lena.
I know.
That's
just
how we feel.
Hate.
No, you guys, we are not hating on these people.
No, we are not.
Don't take a sound bite.
Yes. Don't you dare.
Don't you dare.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dig into some questions and just rabbit holes that we found ourselves digging into as we watched.
Let's do that.
One of the first things, so we had both just watched like the first episode in the docuseries, and we checked in with each other, and you raised this question that I found really interesting because we had such different reactions to it. You asked me, how can you be in your 30s in a hetero marriage and not know that you're gay? So referring to Sally and Lena, that was just kind of mind-blowing for you.
Yeah.
You were like, how do you get that far into your life, into your marriage, into having kids, and truly, as they claim, have no idea that you're actually gay?
I know. As a woman who grew up in the church and who struggled to come to terms with her sexuality starting at a really young age, I just kind of can't. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine.
Yes.
I can rationalize it, like the way that they explain it. You know, they just really never let themselves see outside of what the expectation for them was. Whereas I never had that ability. I was just like, how do you never? Because it just plagued me growing up. I mean, I remember being like 7 years old, 8 years old, and so worried about it. Because they you know, depending on who your Sunday school teacher is, they're talking about it at church. You know, you start hearing from a really young age about how it's so sinful and gay people are so selfish, and you're like, well, I'm attracted to women, you know, like, what, you know?
Yeah. And when you raised that question and shared that, I was like, that's interesting, because I can completely understand how you could get into your 30s and not know your own sexual orientation. And I think the more I've thought about it, the more I've wondered if my ability to understand this because of my experience highlights one of the reasons I was able to stay in as long as I did, and you had to get out as early as you did. I really did have the capacity from a young age to click off some thoughts in my brain, to just be like, you can't think about that. You can't wonder about that. You can't worry about that. You can't look closely at that. You got to turn it off. I never was thinking about my sexuality, gay or straight or anywhere in between, growing up, even into my 20s. It was just something I was never even allowing myself to look at.
Yeah.
And
couldn't relate less.
And if I had, like they did, gotten married in that time period where I just never even let myself think about it, I can totally imagine myself just not knowing. Just not knowing. One thing it made me think about too is when you're on a Mormon mission, the night before you go home, so it's the end of your mission, the night before you leave, all missionaries stay at the mission president's house. At least this is how they do this in the US. Stay at the mission president's house. You have individual interviews with him where he gives you advice, and then you have like group meetings where he gives you more advice. The strongest advice that was given in individual and group settings was get married as soon as possible. We were 21, 22, 23-year-olds. And it was like, go home and get married as fast as you can. And the rationale was, there are these like ordinances you need to engage in as a member of the church in order to achieve exaltation. And the last of those ordinances is celestial marriage in the temple. And so you needed to do it ASAP. Otherwise you'd be like tempted away. Like the devil would be working hard to pull you away. And so there was this like fear that if you didn't do it soon enough, you'd get pulled away, but also this like sort of cultural fear that if you didn't do it soon enough, the pickings would be slim. You'd be an outcast, which is all true in Mormon culture. So folks were going home and getting married so fast, so young, without a minute to breathe, a minute to recover from the traumatic mission they'd just been on, a minute to think about their sexuality. Of course, people get caught up and they haven't had time to like really know themselves.
And
once you're in that, once you're married and you're having kids, you know, it takes a lot to pause and step back and say, who am I really? And do I really even want this?
Brock Aiken, in his interview on their podcast, the Peace Out podcast, which I would recommend listening to. It was a really good episode. He said something about how, I think he had a bishop at one point who I think he shared his struggles with. He was going through conversion therapies, trying to grapple with same-sex attraction, and this bishop or this person's advice to him was to try to get married and have kids right away, because once you have kids, that will like bond you with your spouse, and I guess theoretically they won't leave you, you won't leave them because you have kids. Terrible.
That's horrible. And like, you think about all the harm that's done to individuals and families when that advice is taken before someone really has a chance to know themselves and what they really want. And like, that's one thing we both commented on in the first episode. When you meet Sally and Lena's ex-husbands, you can't help but feel for these men who are, like victims of the church's efforts to repress sexuality, just like these women were.
Yeah,
there's so much material damage done because of advice exactly like what you're describing.
Yep.
Just put your head down, don't think about it, get married, have kids, the rest will sort itself out.
Yeah.
No, maybe not. And also more people will be involved.
Yeah.
So much respect to Lena and Sally for being able, even in the thick of things, to like stop and take stock of themselves and realize they wanted something different, and then to make a change. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing.
Totally.
But there's still so much heartbreak in that story.
Yeah. And one of the husbands, Lena's husband, seems to take it in stride, and he participates in the larger like family activities and whatnot.
He was at their wedding.
He was at their wedding, and he looked so cute in his little outfit. And
he was cheering. It made me tear up. I just felt for that guy, like, who's clearly trying so hard to like understand and be supportive and loving and be a part of his kids' lives. Oh, I just can't imagine.
Yeah, he seemed to have a really healthy outlook on it. He was like, yeah, obviously I wish that my wife had been straight, but she's not. So anyway.
So anyway, it's not about me. Let's move on. Like, there was one point where he said, when I knew her, she was a caterpillar, now she's a butterfly. Oh, it was real sweet. He just seemed like such a sweetheart. I mean, both of the husbands seemed like sweethearts.
Yeah, Sally's husband struggled a lot more, and that's, I mean, I don't know,
understandable. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back into it. The docuseries is looking at the experiences of LGBTQ Mormons, and that led me down a rabbit hole. I ended up finding this Wikipedia page that's a timeline of LGBT Mormon history, and I have to tell you, it is thorough. Yeah, someone has done the work. Yes, it's broken up into decades and just periods of Mormon history. It's compiling over a century's worth of Mormon leaders saying hostile and horrifying things to and about LGBTQ folks, individual Mormons engaging in anti-gay violence, news of that, the church donating tons of money to support anti-gay legislation over the years, and submitting amicus briefs for anti-gay laws, in support of anti-gay laws, church's anti-LGBTQ policies, and misinformation, and the whims of the leaders, and like the shifts in their rhetoric. All of this is like documented in this timeline. It is a dark read. Yeah, it is horrifying. Yeah. But I think it's relevant to get into a little bit of it because, again, like this docuseries, I want to think about the ways that a practicing Mormon might encounter it and how they might try to make sense of the stories they're hearing from these LGBTQ Mormons and like justify their continued participation in the church in spite of these stories they're hearing. And I just, as I was reading through this timeline and thinking about the stories in this docuseries, there's no justification that you can make as a practicing Mormon for supporting the church that doesn't make you complicit in anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, policies, agenda.
100%.
It is a well documented history of consistent hostility towards LGBTQ folks.
Yep. Hostility and violence.
Yes. Undeniable.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through like a few kind of movements I noticed coming up in this timeline. I just wanted to focus real quick on early Mormon leaders, like over the pulpit in general conference. What are they saying about gay people? And there's this horrific talk from October 1897, George Q. Cannon. He describes homosexuality as abominable and filthy. He says the only way to stop these dreadful practices is by the destruction of those who practice them, and for the Lord to wipe them out. And he says if a little nest of them were left, they would soon corrupt others.
Wow.
So yikes.
Great guy.
Horrifying, violent, extreme.
Yes.
So that's the messaging in the early church. We move into the 1900s and get more of that kind of messaging, but there is this movement I noticed in the 40s that I thought was really interesting. So we have 1948, 2 gay BYU students meet with the prophet, George Albert Smith, and talk to him about how they're in love. What should they do?
Yeah. And
apparently he told them to live their lives as best they could in their companionship.
Isn't that nice?
Feels very different.
Yeah. And you know what that makes me think of? And it makes me so angry. It's like George Albert Smith probably just like so at some point in his life had some sort of like interactions with gay people or with like homosexuality himself, to a point where it made him just like sympathetic and just more understanding. Like he was made to understand by some experience in his life. And he just like kind of carried that with him. Because I feel like it's like men, especially men, just get this like, I don't know, there's just all this like anti-gay rhetoric, you know, fed to especially men.
Internalized.
And it makes them feel so violent and like so aggressive,
threatened and fearful and angry. Yeah.
Right.
And then it takes this one person who, for whatever reason, has a more compassionate stance. And suddenly the whole sort of approach in the church for a couple of years shifts. I mean, in Mormonism, you're taught that the prophet is guided by God, right? And that God is this sort of unchangeable force. And we'll see later in this timeline how that's what the brethren say, like homosexuality will never be acceptable to God. So then why was it in 1948? Why was George Albert Smith like cool with it? To me, this just shows that the church is driven by the whims of the people in charge at the time, rather than by anything more concrete or real than that. And that is so infuriating.
Yeah. I know, when it's something as important as this and it's continues to be treated like this. It's just sort of up to whoever you talk to. You'll kind of get different messaging and, you know, and the church's stance is just so like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, well, we love them. They're great.
Yeah.
But we don't condone.
But they're unacceptable. Yeah.
They're unacceptable.
No, and we'll see more of that throughout this timeline. Another thing in the 40s, other BYU students talked about there being this like thriving gay community of students at BYU. There was not this push to get them out of there like there would be later.
Yeah.
So that's the 40s. In 1958, a sort of important thing happens. Bruce R. McConkie publishes the book Mormon Doctrine. I know we had a copy of this book in our house growing up. It was sort of like an encyclopedia of Mormon terms. If you wanted to understand something, this is a place you went. It was, I don't think ever canonized by the church, but it was treated like scripture. In Mormon Doctrine, he says about homosexuality, it is among Lucifer's chief means of leading souls to hell. In a section on chastity, he says it's better to be dead clean than alive unclean. And he says that Mormon parents would rather their child, quote, come back in a pine box with their virtue than return alive without it.
Terrible.
Yikes. Again, it makes me think about like these stories in Mormon No More, like Brock Aiken's story, or the story of Matt Easton, the valedictorian at BYU, and Harry Fisher, the student he knew who had committed suicide.
Yeah.
This sense that like you're better dead than alive if you are gay is not a thing that those folks are just pulling out of nowhere. It's a thing deeply embedded in Mormon doctrine. It's literally in the book titled Mormon Doctrine.
Yeah.
The very next year, BYU starts their electroshock therapy program. So you can see, again, the whims of these men, their own deep homophobia drives the policies of the church. And the electroshock program at BYU lasted for decades. It was going on in the mid-90s.
It's so horrifying.
So horrifying. So that was the late 50s. In the 1960s, Ernest Wilkinson was the president of the church, and he was incredibly homophobic. The main student center at BYU to this day is called the Wilkinson Center. So like these people who were so like violent and horrible to LGBTQ students and members of the church are revered. There's no sort of acknowledgement like this was a problematic person who did violence to a community. And so we're not going to name a building after him. We're not going to name the main student hub after this person. There's just no awareness.
Yeah. Because I think for a lot of people, though, openly, they wouldn't agree with exactly what he said. You know, they agree with the spirit of it.
Yeah. And they're not taking a stand against it.
No.
So his big initiative in the 1960s was that BYU would not even admit gay students, regardless of their action. If you experience same-sex attraction, as the church likes to put it, you would not be admitted. And he said that in an address to students in 1965. He said, "Nor do we intend to admit to this campus any homosexuals. If any of you have this tendency, may I suggest you leave the university immediately. We do not want others on this campus to be contaminated by your presence." Can you imagine being a gay student in that meeting and hearing that?
I don't know. No, I don't know how those people, how anybody survived.
Yes. So that was 1965. In 1969, Spencer W. Kimball published the book The Miracle of Forgiveness, another book we also had in our house.
Yeah.
A book I was assigned to read in a BYU religion class in the 2000s. In this book, he talks about how homosexuality is, of course, curable, like no question. It is not a thing you're born with. It is a sin, and you can overcome it. He says you can overcome it fast. People overcome it in a matter of months.
Okay.
He also said if you don't overcome it, it can lead you to having sex with animals.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So that is another idea I've heard in the church very recently. I've had friends who, when they've come out to their parents have been like, "Oh, are you also to bestiality? Are you into pedophilia?" They're all connected by this messaging from the church for decades. I remember being at EFY, Mormon Summer Camp, and I remember some horrible man was speaking to us, and he was talking about how gay marriage was just an absolute abomination and we should fight against it with all our might. And he said, at any gay pride parade, you have the gay people marching, but right behind them, you have the pedophiles and the people who engage in bestiality and incest. They're right there. They're all linked. I remember even as a kid being like, what?
That's so stupid.
Wait, what is this man saying to us?
That's exactly the kind of talk that I heard as a young person in the church that made me feel like, oh, I got to get out of here,
Yeah.
from a very young age. I really remember that being the first thing that caused cracks in my foundation. I remember just being like, I know you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I just know that what you're saying is so terrible and wrong.
Okay, moving on then to the 70s. In 1978, Boyd K. Packer gave a terrible sermon that was published as a pamphlet called To the One. And this was a pamphlet we were given on our missions to give to people, again, in the 2000s. And in this pamphlet, he talks about being gay as a perversion. It's rooted in selfishness. It can be cured through unselfishness.
That's exactly how it was taught to me.
Yeah.
Because I remember being like, selfish.
Right.
Selfish?
I don't even understand. Yeah, I can't even begin to unpack that. But it's horrifying. And you can just see through our experience growing up how that messaging was pervasive. This idea that if you were gay, you were selfish because you weren't willing to put the opportunity to like have a family or something within the structures of the church above your own sexual desire. He talked about how the church hasn't said a lot about homosexuality in the past because, quote, some matters are best handled very privately, and we can very foolishly cause things we are trying to prevent by talking too much about them. So there we get the roots of all kinds of problematic thinking about, like, makes me think of like the don't say gay laws that are coming up now. Like if you talk to kids about sexuality, it'll make them gay.
Absurd.
Just bonkers nonsense. Baloney.
Yeah. How did all these stupid people get into these positions of power?
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of my years in the church, I felt like I was the only one listening. Like I would hear people say things and I'd be like, what? And I just look around like, how come nobody is freaking out right now? That person said something horrible. And it was like nothing had happened. I just felt that way all the time.
Yeah. And if we were to ever hear about it at home, like let's say it was something so crazy, the only way it would come up would be like our dad being like kind of grumpy after church and like,
or it was dismissed as like an idiosyncrasy of an individual. Like, well, oh, sister so-and-so says a lot of weird stuff, or brother so-and-so, yeah, he's crazy. But what about the system that made them?
Yeah.
What about the system that enables them? What about the system that puts them up in front of a bunch of kids every Sunday to teach us?
Yeah. And nobody says anything. Oh, it's just right. Them.
If you think they're crazy and dangerous, don't let them be my seminary teacher. Okay, let's move through a couple of other things in this timeline real quick. Just more misinformation. In the 90s, Boyd K. Packer, once again, with another hit, he said in General Conference, humans can degrade themselves below animals by pairing with people of the same sex, since animals don't mate with other animals of the same sex. Just absolutely not true at all.
Not true.
Like it's been observed in many species of animal. It's just not true. So like weird misinformation, not even rooted in fact. And like, why are you making this comparison? It's so degrading, but also just wrong. In 1995, the Proclamation on the Family is published. This is, I do think, has been canonized. And this is the church's position on the family, gender, etc. And it says marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's it. And it's essential. And it also says that gender is an essential characteristic of individual, premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose, which is language that Mormons use to argue against trans rights.
Very nice.
Very nice. Congrats, guys. Way to knock it out of the park with that one. Okay, we're moving into the 2000s, which you would hope would get better, but the messaging just shifts. Still in problematic ways, just different problematic ways.
Yeah.
So in 2006, Jeffrey R. Holland and Marlon K. Jensen were interviewed for a PBS documentary called The Mormons, which would maybe be interesting to watch for the podcast.
I'm down.
And in it, they're asked about the church's stance on homosexuality. Marlon K. Jensen said the church could never change its position. There's no room within the plan of salvation for homosexuality to be accepted. And then Elder Holland agrees and says, gay or lesbian inclinations will not exist post-mortality. So this is a shift that happens. Wow. They go from it's curable, well, it's the worst thing ever and you need to be rooted out and killed, to it's curable, to and you weren't born with it. You know, it's a sin. It's curable. You can overcome it. To, okay, maybe you were born with it and maybe it's a thing you're going to experience your whole life, but when you die, it'll be gone. And so there's this promise of like, if you can just hold on for mortality and either like never have a romantic relationship or have like a mixed orientation relationship that you just kind of white knuckle your way through for your entire life, then when you die, you will no longer have these feelings or desires.
And that's so sad to me, because I feel like in a lot of ways, your average everyday Mormon is doing just that, just white knuckling through life,
through all kinds of things,
to this promise of, you know, living in God's glory. Yeah, which is sad on its own, but to think that you would, you know, deprive yourself of like one of the ultimate happinesses in life.
Yeah.
Just for some
hope of a future life that may or may not be real.
Yeah.
It is just so clearly like messaging. Just like, how do we spin this so we don't lose every Mormon who's ever gay?
Yeah.
But also so we can keep this hard line where there's no room in the plan of salvation for you. Another thing that leaders start to say in the 2000s is that being gay is like being born with a disability. So yeah, you can be born gay, just like you can be born with a disability. And when you die, you will no longer have that disability. In 2008, we have the church lobbying hard for Proposition 8 in California. They do this like satellite broadcast where they ask members to donate like every Saturday until the election to campaigning in the streets. I mean, major. And the amount of money they spend on that has been well documented. In 2015, another horrific policy comes out. It was leaked, actually, this letter announcing the policy, and the policy banned a child of a parent living in a same-gender relationship from being blessed or baptized or confirmed a member of the church until the child was no longer living with their gay parents, was of legal age, and disavowed the practice of same-gender cohabitation in marriage. So if you were raised by a gay couple, you had to grow up, move out of the house, and disavow your parents' marriage in order to participate in Mormonism.
I don't know. I don't know how anybody stayed in the church at that point.
Right? I remember when that letter was leaked, I saw it on like Twitter, and I remember it seemed so outlandish that I was like, this has to be like a scam, you know? This is some kind of weird social media thing. Like, this can't be real because it's just so over the top. They also in the policy said that same-sex marriage is a type of apostasy, and folks who engaged in it should have disciplinary councils and be like excommunicated. So they were taking this really intense stance against gay couples, but also their children. And I remember like having that brief moment of being like, this has got to be a scam. It's so over the top. And then realizing it wasn't.
Yeah.
And mom called me in tears and was just like, I'm really upset about this. This is really horrific. She asked me about friends of mine who were gay and Mormon and how they were doing. She's like, I've been thinking about so-and-so and so-and-so and how they must feel. And just so upset. And she's like, the thing I'm most upset about is I'm worried that this is going to lead you to lose your faith.
Wow. I didn't know she said that.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly didn't help.
And I mean, I already didn't have it at that point, but just that was the thing she was most worried about. When shouldn't it lead me to lose my faith? I mean, this is really terrible. Shouldn't it lead all of us to lose our faith? Because what do we have faith in at that point? Like, these are not good people.
No. This is straight up evil. Yeah.
There was also, not to get too into the weeds with this, the next day after the policy came out, the church released a video with D. Todd Christofferson, a general authority whose brother is very like famously out and also a sort of Mormon apologist. So they very carefully chose who would deliver this message, which I found icky.
Yeah.
I remember too, he was sitting in this like really gilded room, which I also found icky. And he talked about how this policy was all about love. It was just all very disgusting. A couple of months later, it also led to mass exit from the church. People resigning their membership left and right. A couple of months later, Russell M. Nelson gives a talk, and he says that this policy was revealed to President Monson, the prophet at the time, in a sacred moment when the Lord inspired him to declare the will of the Lord. Which is interesting because in April 2019, the policy was abandoned. Yeah. Because it was a disaster.
Yeah.
So if it was revelation, it lasted a few years, really? Like, what do we make of that? How do you explain that?
I can't wrap my mind around. There are some things that just like make me so angry. Angry at the people that we know who are still in. And this is one of those things where it like makes me speechless. Like, I just can't believe that you could just sit with that.
And I know practicing progressive Mormons who saw that policy walk back as this sign of progress. Like, see, they recognize the errors of their ways. But what it is it reveals the fundamental lie of Mormonism, which is that its leaders are led by an unchangeable God who like sees, the end from the beginning, when like, no, that's not what happened. A group of homophobic men created a policy. It was a PR disaster, and the church was bleeding members, and they went, "Ooh, I think we went too far with this.
Pull it back.
Walk it back."
Yeah, I know. I remember thinking at the time, like, just wondering what the deal was. Like, are they intentionally coming out with these revelation, like, as a way to test members or something?
Right.
Are they trying to weed people out in order
I'm sure
to
that's
like
a thing some people
strengthen the base? Yeah.
I'm sure that's something that people use to explain it to themselves. And like, oh, look, I outlasted that test.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of mind games. It's wild.
Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to bring up from the timeline actually comes up in this docuseries, and it's Matt Easton's story about being valedictorian at BYU. And he says that he submitted his talk for approval to BYU administration and it was approved. So he comes out during his valedictorian speech. BYU administration knows he's going to do it. Say, do it. Great. We support you. There's like a lot of people celebrating that moment as this like great stride in LGBTQ visibility in the church. But then in 2021, Elder Holland gives a talk to BYU faculty and administrators, and he alludes to Matt Easton's valedictorian speech. And he describes Matt Easton's speech as commandeering the podium to come out, and frames this as like a divisive, selfish act. So there's just so much flip-flopping and like misinformation and like problematic messaging and outright hostility and violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the legacy of Mormonism.
Yeah.
And I know that was a really deep rabbit hole to take us down, but I do think it's relevant to this docuseries. And it was like really helpful to me to dig into the trends over time.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it just really reveals that the foundation is rotten.
Yeah. It's been interesting in this whole process of starting this podcast, like learning so much in such a short amount of time. Like I remember when we first started under the banner of heaven, and we were like, blood atonement, what's blood atonement, learning about blood atonement, and now making connections between blood atonement and treatment of LGBTQ people in the church, and reading this timeline and seeing how gay people have been blood atoned. And it's just been horrifyingly eye-opening.
Right. Because under the banner of heaven is supposedly this like anti-Mormon sort of fringe artifact of pop culture. But then you see elements of it, showing up in the sort of historical timeline of the church. And I will say, this Wikipedia work that's been done, the citations are immaculate, and they're citing Mormon historians left and right.
Yeah.
And well documented conference talks and
they keep it really
policies.
Tight. It's really tight
there.
Yeah. If you find that sort of thing interesting, would highly recommend a read through, though it is incredibly upsetting.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah, for sure. I liked reading about all the different people in the way back in days who were like gay Mormons who left Utah to go live in like New York City and become poets.
To become like poets and actors and drag queens.
I know. I want to know more about them. That's
a
documentary I want to see.
100%.
Yeah. Show me that documentary.
Yes.
Hulu. Yeah, what I enjoyed most about the documentary was definitely Brock Aiken's story, and his story about conversion therapy and going through Dave Matheson's program. And that I want them to do. I wish that they had just given him a whole season. But yeah, like I said, Brock Aiken's podcast episode on Peace Out with Sally and Lena was really good, and would highly recommend listening to that. And I just like related to him so much and just felt so sympathetic to him. I can't help but feel like, just so sad for all the little kids going through questioning their sexuality, and it's just something
agonizing over
you should not have to agonize over.
Yeah.
It's so sad. He talked about how before and I relate to this so much. He talked about before he turned 8, how he was like, I have to get this under control before I get baptized.
Ugh.
A 7-year-old.
That is so heartbreaking.
Yeah. But I can relate to that so much. I remember having the same thoughts as a 7-year-old. I remember being so scared of getting baptized because I knew that I couldn't stop sinning. I knew that I was just a bad kid and that I was just going to be in a world of trouble.
Which is so nuts to me. Like, as your sister who knew you well as the 7-year-old, you were just like such a little sweetheart, such an innocent, funny, sassy little kid. You weren't doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I sure thought I was. I thought I was just the worst. Yeah. But, that, for better or worse, was the beginning of my quick path out. I was like, I gotta get out of this. It led to some very hard times as a young person dealing with like rebellion and, just normal teenager stuff. At the end of the day, normal teenager stuff. But through the lens of Mormonism, it was a little bit hardcore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just feel it so deeply. I just so want to reach out to that little kid and be like, it's okay. You're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was incredible when Brock sat down with Dave Matheson, who was the creator of this certain kind of conversion therapy.
So for anyone who maybe hasn't watched this yet, Dave Matheson is a Mormon guy who claimed to have been gay and overcome it. And he was a therapist, and he developed therapies and like wilderness weekends for gay Mormons to overcome their gayness.
Right. Yep.
And Brock attended therapy for years, it sounds like, and these wilderness weekends.
Yeah.
And they sound incredibly troubling and horrible. And to just be told that like you are a problem that needs fixing.
Right. And to be fed the lie that you can be fixed, you know, by these people who are just like you. It's such a betrayal.
And then the twist with Dave Matheson is he, in the last few years, it sounds like, left his wife, was like, no, I'm gay.
Yeah.
And is doing all these interviews where he's talking about that. And we had a conversation about that. Like, yes, Dave Matheson is a victim of Mormonism, but he also preyed on young gay Mormon boys through these therapies for decades.
Yeah, I know.
And how do you get past that?
I don't know. Like, I can sympathize with being, you know, confused and being repressed, but like, you're an abusive dude.
Yes.
You know? Well, and like some of the stuff that they were doing was like borderline sexual, you know, the physical touch, like men just need physical touch in order to overcome. And
honestly, I've heard stories about these weekends from other friends of mine that sound way worse than what Brock talks about in the documentary. Like, I've heard it gets way worse. So yeah, problematic dude. And I loved Brock confronting him, but I also felt like Dave Matheson, he was really making me mad in that scene.
Me too. I wanted to punch him in the face. I wanted to be like, Brock, get out of here. And I just punch him right in the face.
What did he keep saying? He was like, I'm so sad this happened to you.
Yeah, he was like real sad, you know, just real sad about it. And it's like, okay.
Not, and I'm like, sorry I did this to you. I know. Like, he said that maybe once, but he kept saying like, I'm so sad this happened to you, or I'm so sad you had to go through that. No, he didn't have to go through that.
Yeah, you did that.
You put him through that.
Yeah. Ooh, I know. Making poster boards with like magazine cutouts of women's body parts and talking about like what they didn't like and like what
they were
scared of.
Also really disgusting and objectifying of women. Like, that's not good for anybody.
No.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I found Brock's story to be really like troubling, but also really beautiful. Like when he talked about you know, one of his many prayers to like overcome being gay, and how he had the thought, what if it's just okay to be you?
Yeah.
And that was kind of his moment of letting go.
It does make me sad that he's still in.
Is he still in? I wasn't sure from
I think he's not sure, but the way that he worded it in the documentary is that he would still consider himself in. And he posted something on social media about how he doesn't like the name of the show, or you know, I didn't have any say in the name of the show because I don't think he is out.
And you got to respect where everybody's at, but it is like, once you're out and you realize that so much of what you were told about leaving was to like make you afraid to leave.
Yeah.
And that it's not real.
Yeah. No.
I just read a tweet last night. It wasn't a new tweet, but I like came upon it again for some reason. But it was someone who'd left the church, and they said that they thought it would feel like falling off a cliff, but it actually felt like floating.
Yeah.
It's like a relief. You feel lighter.
It makes you feel so much lighter. It's such a comfort. You like, I feel like you get to know yourself like for real. And I feel like before I left, I didn't have like a lot of real relationships. Like I started seeing other people differently. Like people like had like inherent worth that maybe like, I don't know. I just like, it was like all encompassing. I changed pretty much 100% when I just let it go.
Yeah. Changed like 100%, and also I'm exactly the same person.
Yeah, I know. And then you sit down in front of people who are in, and you're like, I'm still this to you. You're still this to me.
Yeah.
You know,
that's one thing I wanted to talk about, just maybe to wrap up, is in the final episode, we learn that Sally's mom has left the church. Yeah. And her journey was really interesting to me. We see her in earlier episodes be like, look, I'm never gonna leave.
Yeah.
This faith is like who I am. And by the last episode, she's like, I'm on my way out. I'm gonna wear my sleeveless dress.
Yeah.
And you know, support my children, and my relationships with them are more important. And at some point, she and Sally have a conversation where her mom says, when you told me you were leaving the church, I felt like you were like abandoning our relationship or giving up on our relationship, because the two were so intertwined. And when she said that, I thought, I don't know if our mom would ever articulate that exact thought, but I bet she could relate to that.
Oh, it's 100% true.
This feeling of sort of being abandoned or like betrayed or left behind by your kids when they leave the church. And I just really appreciated that Sally's mom, though she had that feeling, she was able to move beyond it and recognize like, no, my relationship with my children doesn't have to be over or ruined or lost. It can still be great and maybe even better.
Yeah, I know. What a concept.
When we're all living authentically, our relationships can be better.
Yeah. I know. That made me so happy.
I was inspired by Sally's mom.
Yeah, she was awesome. When she put on that dress, sleeveless dress, she's like, I can't wear my garments with this. I was like, you go.
Yeah.
Nan.
You go, Nan. Way to go, Nan.
Yeah.
Yeah, all in all, a great docuseries. Highly recommend.
Yeah, totally.
We talked a little crap in the beginning, but don't hold it against us.
But that's not what it was, Elisa.
No, we weren't talking crap. We
were explaining how someone might.
Yes.
So.
Well said.
Thanks. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody.
Please bless this podcast.
Please. Thank you. Amen.
Amen.